Hey guys, so I think enough time since the WP anthem went up has gone by to start doing some other videos. Today I want to talk about more newsy type stuff, because this of course has been a pretty big weekend, as it's the Revenant beta weekend and the return of Stronghold for the third time, I think, for us as the public. I believe there was a stress test at some point before that too. So a lot of stuff's going on. There have been some pretty hilarious bugs. I want to talk to you guys about that, and also, though there's no elite specialization stuff going on, though there's no formal big news going on, there was a huge points of interest. I will readily admit, and I think most of us are probably like this, if there's not elite specializations going on or some like core Heart of Thorns feature, we kind of look at the Revenant live streams, or I know I do this, and I'm like, they're probably not going to talk about anything super great there. But this was a huge one. It was like a 2-hour-long points of interest, had loads of little segments. That wonderful opening clip you just saw, yeah, came from POI, so I'll sum that up for you guys as well. Let's jump in. Alright, so first let's talk about the Revenant beta. I personally have not, at the time of recording this, I probably will for some footage for the video, I haven't actually made a Revenant. I don't know, maybe I got my feel from it from the betas I played in Brighton before, maybe I got my feel from the previous beta where we were running around in the Heart of Thorns stuff. It's just not appealing to me too much. I do think that the class has got some ways to go. Yeah, we're only getting, what, like 80% or 60% of the class right now, considering we don't have Shiro, we don't have Glints, as long as those actually are the legends, and specifically the lack of its elite specialization, and namely its DPS specialization Shiro, and because DPS is mostly what people care about for PvE stuff, it kind of feels hamstrung, you know, it kind of feels like there's a lot you can't do with it right now. You can run Zerg stuff on your Revenant, it's just you're going to be running Zerg stuff while channeling legends and specializing in trait lines that aren't really made for it, and so what you get is really lackluster. I was surprised to hear actually that of all the auto attacks, Staff is actually the highest DPS one, which I like to hear, because I really want that monk-style battle staff dude smashing people in the face to be kind of high damage, but yeah, in general, it's very, very low damage. There was kind of a joke thread on Reddit about how some people did CMP1, not the longest path in the world, has some of the shortest records for like speed clears, at least some really good tactics, and it took them an hour to complete. And in Guild Wars 2 of today, maybe at launch, an hour for a dungeon path was quite a reasonable time. For Guild Wars 2 of today, damn, that's a hell of a long path. So they're really, really crippled at the moment. Colin actually had a note on this as well, which I'll talk about when we get to POI. And I think the other problem too is the class is, if you look at Guild Wars 2 moving to the weapons system where each weapon gives you 5 skills, and it's kind of that arcadey, right, we're going to give you bundles of skills. The Revenant is the absolute epitome of that. It doesn't have a weapon swap, and then they're doing the exact same thing for the right-hand side of your skill bar too. And I've been giving it the benefit of the doubt so far. I've been thinking, you know, it could be fun. We've seen a lot of the specializations so far though, and I really think just how canned everything is, how closely tied the weapons you wield are to the specializations you pick, how closely tied the specializations you pick are to the only utility skills you can run, really makes it feel like a class that doesn't get that much wiggle room for builds. And especially then, compounded by the fact we're missing 2 specializations, I don't know, the excitement is not there for me too much. Anyway, you can play a Revenant anywhere you like for this entire weekend. If you're watching the video, the only prerequisite is that you did pre-purchase the game. But by doing this, you get a beta slot, and any character you make on that beta slot will essentially be like its own account. It's really cool, and Colin talked about this again on Points of Interest. For a lot of games, a lot of MMOs, and Guild Wars 2 historically, until this point really, or the last PvE beta, you'd always have to download an entirely other client, right? You basically have to download another game, and on this, loads of stuff would be restricted, loads of stuff would be sort of locked out, and you wouldn't be able to interact with anything in the main game. Well, for this beta, they've kind of developed this whole system where anything you do on that specific character slot counts as its own account. So, for example, when the login rewards proc, if you're on your Revenant character, you'll get your login rewards, you'll get laurels, you'll get whatever it is, and then if you log on to one of your other characters, same account, same client, everything's the same, you'll get your login rewards again, because that's for your main account. Any achievements you get on the Revenant will not be achievements on the main account. Any skins you unlock, anything, it's like its own account. Basically what they did was, just before the beta started, they copied your account, the status of your bank, everything, and then you have that for that Revenant, and it kind of allows you to go on a bit of a spending spree too. If you had like 4,000 laurels, then you could log on to your Revenant, spend all 4,000 laurels and tons of T6 mats just to see what you'd get. You can't trade them on the trading post or anything, and you can't be as part of a guild, but then you can log back onto your main account and you've got all your laurels still. So you can do weird stuff like that. People were rolling the free exotics you get for creating a Revenant, and, you know, they gear you out with exotic stuff. All the spare stuff they were throwing in the Mystic Forge, and you can get a precursor. Except that precursor you're not going to be able to keep, because everything on that beta slot is then going to get removed, honestly. So, no, I don't think people who get precursors on their Revenant are necessarily entitled to them. But that's another reason maybe I haven't been playing it so much, because think about this. I did a full dungeon sweep yesterday, and if I had done that on my Revenant, even if it did have, you know, somewhere mediocre DPS, right, so that we could actually get through in a reasonable amount of time, and I didn't have that horrible sagging feeling that I was dragging my team down at all times I was on my Revenant. In any drops I get there, any gold I get there, what if I've never had a precursor drop? What if the very first precursor that ever drops for me after like 6,000 hours in Guild Wars 2 is on my Revenant? I would not be able to live that down, because I would not be able to keep that precursor. So there's certain things about it, but overall I think it's really clever the way they've done it. You can play with your friends. As I said, there's just a couple of stuff that's locked off, like mailing. I don't think you can mail. I don't think there's any trading posts, and specifically guilds you don't have either, and that seems like a real shame. But they disabled the whole guild system so that you can't do what I just expressed with laurels, for example, then drop them all in your guild bank and then withdraw them on a regular character, so you can't join guilds either. But it's an opportunity to play the Revenant and see how it fares, not just in PvE, but in World vs. World. You can build like your big highway in World vs. World and have the entire Zerg run along on paved roads that give them stability and swiftness. Or you can take it into Stronghold, the new PvP game type, and see how it fares there. I haven't really played any of that either, though there's been a lot of updates to Stronghold, and a lot of what I talk about in this video is going to be to do with that. Something else about the Revenant 2, this beta for him, you can still only play as humans. Colin expressed in the live stream that the reason for this was the animations for the other races weren't finished, and specifically voice work for the other races wasn't finished. We have heard that because the Revenant talks to their legends as they wander around, they kind of have like this multiple personality thing, like you will find yourself talking to Malix while invoking him. There's a lot of VO that goes on with Revenant, and I guess just a lot of that isn't in place yet. So that's why you can only do humans. However, because you can play this anywhere in the game, you can do stuff like, oh, play your Revenant in fractals, go to the Ascalon fractal that turns you into a Char, and what do you know, you're a Char! And there are videos of this, so you can see some of their animations, at least the work in place ones. I believe there's a way to see Char from that fractal, you can see Asura from the Thormanova fractal, you can see Sylvari somewhere too, perhaps that's Living World? Perhaps. So maybe that's like in Caledon, where you do the heart, where you become a Nightmare Court. That would be pretty interesting. The only one that you can't really see, as far as I understand it, is Norn. Why? Because everybody hates Norn, and they don't deserve a transform. Okay, probably not that, but yeah, you can't see Norn. Alright, so moving on, there was a patch that came with this beta, obviously. A couple of little things I missed from the last time I talked about patch 2. Number one was, there was a bit of discussion about when they changed the trait system, they added a couple of traits that gave you like a flat amount of attributes, like plus 150 to this or whatever, and it didn't scale lower when you were at a lower level. So not only could you get these huge stat boosts when you were lower level, but also it really messed with upscaling. If you went to an upscaled level like this, like say World vs. World, it would completely blow certain attributes out of the water. That trait would be worth an ungodly amount of stat points for a low level character, and as you level up you're actually getting weaker. It's just weird. You guys might remember when the second anniversary for Guild Wars 2 came out and we got the birthday blasters. There was a bug for a little while where if you went into World vs. World on a level 1 character and shot him with the birthday cake, he'd get a plus flat, what is it, 30 to all attributes, but because of the World vs. World scaling, that would bump it all up so high you were stat capped in World vs. World for every single stat. You're like the equivalent of 3 times the power of a Celestial character. You just do ungodly damage with all your condies, be ridiculously tanky, have the highest power, highest crit chance, highest ferocity. Yeah, kind of nuts. And there was a little bit of this going on again when they moved over to specializations. That's been patched out. And the other thing I thought was quite interesting, a lot of people won't talk about this, but because I've been making a lot of new characters, specifically Char characters at the moment, they say that the tutorial maps are now on the Mega Server system. I never realized they weren't on the Mega Server system. So what's a tutorial map, you might ask? No, it's not what we saw in Tyro 3D just the other week. Those are the maps where you very first start out and you're in your own confined little area. For humans, you're in the midst of a storm and an attack of centaurs on Shamor, you end up in the garrison and then you port through. Those little areas, ArenaNet call those the tutorial maps, apparently, though they don't really teach you much. And yeah, they apparently weren't on Mega Servers. So until this patch, if you were an Emery Bay player, you would only ever see other Emery Bay players there, and that may be why they always seem super empty. But now, for the first time in a long time, I played a Char character after this patch, and I saw that event where the gates to the catacombs are closed because someone else is already in there, already fighting the statue of Baradin. I think I may have seen that before that day, once my entire time playing Guild Wars 2. I was very shocked to see the event still existed. And yeah, you now see more people in those tutorial areas. It's important, you know, these are people's first impressions of the MMO, and they don't want to feel like they're alone, even from the very get-go, I'd say. Alright, moving on, let's talk about points of interest. So, Colin had a section at the start with Ruby. You'll find me praising them a lot for various small things or points of interest, I admit it. But Colin's appearance here was absolutely far and away fantastic. He was incredibly candid about the state of the game, incredibly blunt, and clear about like various philosophies and things. So he talked a little bit about the previous Revenant beta where everyone was on Celestial Gear. And we all know, okay, everyone in the community knows Celestial Gear was a bad move. It seems at like a conceptual level like it was a good move because it's like, oh, on Celestial Gear you can play any role you want, that's fine. But it was a bad move and meant everyone felt constricted. No one could fully go into one angle for their Revenant, and it really jaded a lot of people's impressions of the class. Probably mine too, right? I'll admit, even knowing a lot of this has to do with Celestial Gear. And so he kind of came on and he said, yeah, that was a bad idea. You know, it was kind of stupid. For this beta, you'll be able to choose exactly what gear you want. And that's exactly what we want to hear. There were several things he said like this, and it makes it easier to believe him then when he says stuff like, oh, the betas really are to see how good the game is, and we're going to use feedback from these to decide the release date. Yeah, they're kind of marketing. He even said that. He said, yeah, there's an element of this that's to do with marketing, but a lot of it is also to do with the release date. And because he's being so candid, it was incredibly refreshing. I think back to when I was at Brighton and they had just announced Stronghold, and specifically they'd announced that Stronghold would absolutely be in the same queue as Conquest. And a lot of us were asking the devs and saying, look, this is a really bad move. Nobody likes this idea. Can you change this? And the kind of responses you get at those times is like, oh, well, you know, there's hot joins. And everyone in the room knows that hot joins are not a sufficient response to this whole queuing issue we had. But we couldn't get, like, that kind of candidness from them. And it really felt like we got that from Colin. I just thought that was really cool. Anyway, so moving on. What exactly did he say? He came up with some interesting points. They were talking about this queuing thing. So this is a change with TPVP now. You can choose exactly what map or game type you want to queue into. You can say, do you want to play Stronghold? You can say, do you want to play Conquest? People now are saying, oh, you should do that for Courtyard as well. Maybe we'll see that at some point. But yeah, you can kind of choose your preferences for the matchmaking. It's really awesome. Colin was kind of talking about how this was really hard to develop, and a lot of the time short-sighted people in the community might say, oh, just flip the button, just change it, just make it different. And then he said, no, look, this took a lot of work from people, it takes an awful lot of effort. And specifically, what I found interesting was he said it took a team of people 9 months solid. They worked on nothing else to remove the culling. I did not realize that culling was such a huge issue for them to remove. And it was kind of a really cool example for him to give. Then he talked a little bit about kind of difficult content for Heart of Thorns. And he said something that I realized is a misconception I think I've been under for a long time and been parroting to you guys as well for a long time, and maybe we should sort of knock ourselves out of. He said this, he said, it's a big thing in the community where people will say, oh, there's no such thing as tanking or healing in Guild Wars 2. Guild Wars 2 wasn't made for tanking and healing, specifically these two things. And there's a big part of our community that just says Guild Wars 2 does not have these things. It was never supposed to have these things. And then they'll say, you know, if you want the hard trinity, go somewhere else. And specifically what Colin said was, he said, that's never been our philosophy. We actually like tanking. We actually like healing. And specifically in Guild Wars 1, you'll see that that was an element of the gameplay too. He said what they didn't like was that an individual class in other games with this hard trinity, one class could only do one role and another class could only do another role. What they wanted was a game where these roles still exist, but it didn't matter what class you played, you always had an option to spec for the supportive style of gameplay, for the tanky style of gameplay, for the offensive DPS-y style of gameplay. They have this idea of you being able to play what you want, and really I think what they're saying is you should be able to play any class you want. The way you play that class might then sometimes be dictated by the content. And specifically, they talked about how in GW1 there was a lot of waiting around to have fun. They say this all the time, that you would wait for ages in other games for like your tank to appear so you can do your raid, or in Guild Wars 1 specifically it was like waiting for your healers to come. They didn't want that in Guild Wars 2 because they wanted every class to have the capability of fitting any of these roles. But these roles, and specifically tanking and healing, he says they do want to exist in Guild Wars 2. That's what he said, and I think we should really pay attention to that, because there is a lot of arguments and a lot of discussion out there where people say tanking, healing, they're just not for Guild Wars 2. And here we have one of the most prominent devs, one of the biggest influencers of direction for Guild Wars 2 at that company, telling us that's untrue. And specifically with the same breath in the same live stream, saying that those sort of roles, they are trying to incentivize, and specifically he said actually in their testing that the Heart of Thorns content does require these. So, yeah, that's pretty interesting to think about. I don't want to get into another huge discussion about hardcore content, but that was something really cool that he was talking about. Moving on from Colin, I've contracted a lot of what he said, but hey, we're already fairly far into the video here. The next section talked a little bit about Stronghold. Stronghold came up every now and then throughout this points of interest, so I'll just bundle all the information we got up here together. Now, in-game, you can already see this. There's a new tab on your PvP build that allows you to choose your champion. So we had a blog post about this. I already talked to you guys about it, how in Stronghold you can now choose a champion that will summon when you channel these mist essences, and each champion affects the game in a different way. They have kind of an on-arrival effect. So, for example, Chirai Oster, I believe it is, when you summon him, immediately makes everyone on the map block for 6 seconds, and that's not just the players, that's the Lord as well. So you can now summon Chirai Oster if you choose him to be a part of your build. You can summon him right at the last moment as your Lord's about to die, and give your team 6 more seconds to get some heals up on him or push people away, CC them, kill the aggressors. The champions also have various like elite skills when they get into the main room, and like passives as well. So Nika, the new one they announced, Nika will give people perma stealth who's wandering around her. And so Hugh was talking about how whenever you see Nika in a Stronghold match and she's pushing up the lane, you're always like, oh god, okay, that's Nika, I want to kill her, but I have no idea if it's just Nika. Maybe there's a bunch of enemy players hiding right next to her right now, and they're going to jump me the second I engage. And that sounds really fun to me. Really awesome. So they talked a little bit about the champions. And again, you can now see that in the UI. That's changed my perspective on the system a little bit more. I think they could have, the blog post that initially announced champions could have been far more exciting. This is a big part of our build. This is right here on the build window. We choose it as a part of the tab. It's like, okay, I'm going to play this character, and this is my chosen champion. Gives me some real Guild Wars 1E vibes, kind of like choosing our heroes. And as they expand them, as there are more reward tracks, it's looking really positive for the way Stronghold will play. So they talked a bit about champions. Then they talked a little bit more about further changes that have occurred to Stronghold as a result of the previous beta. We all knew that archers were terrible, so they have this system. Hugh kind of called it like a rock, paper, scissors-ish system. It's not quite rock, paper, scissors as far as I can see, but you've got door breakers, break the gates. You've got guards, kill the door breakers, and then you've got archers, kill the guards. So you want to summon a couple of door breakers and a couple of archers as well. But archers were really bad for 2 reasons. Number 1, they weren't even that good at their job. And number 2, we were, as players, were really good at their job. I think they've solved half the issue. I still think it's really not that great to summon archers in Stronghold, because we as players can kill them so much quicker. What do you want to do? Do you want to spend your time in the mid-fight struggling to get supply, which I'll talk about soon, so that you can summon mobs that then have to walk all the way up the lane, have a huge delay, obviously, to get up there, have a high chance that they'll be waylaid and killed by enemy trebs and defenders as they go up there, can be manipulated and exploited through blinds and a variety of other effects, because at the end of the day, they're just AI. Do you want to do that, or do you just want to go up there and kill the enemy guards themselves? You probably want to go out there and kill the enemy guards yourselves. You're pretty good at it as it is, but they're still trying to improve the archers. So archers now move faster, so if you spawn a bunch of archers with door breakers, the archers will always move first forward. They'll always get aggro on guards first, so door breakers aren't dying anyway. So again, they're a bit better at their job. They do a bit more damage now as well, so I think they can 3-shot guards, which is pretty good. But ultimately, I just think that they're still not that strong. There still needs to be more incentive to use them, but what do I know? I haven't actually played too much of the game type yet. They did change supply. Okay, so supply in the middle, it used to be you could just spam up supply. All 5 of your team could just run into the middle, grab supply, leave, grab supply, leave, grab supply, leave. And because there was infinite supply from the 2 racks there, you never really had to fight the enemy team. If both of you wanted supply, there was no actual mid-fight over supply. People would just grab it and leave. And I would do that all the time. You can see that in footage of videos from me whenever I've played this game type. What's the point of fighting? I want to get into the enemy base. I'm not going to waste time fighting other people. So they've changed the way that supply works now. It's a little bit more limited, and each supply depot will only have 2 pieces of supply. So if you have 1 player on each team trying to run supply, they don't necessarily have to fight over it. 1 person grabs 2, then they go, while the other team member gets the other 2 and they go. And every 15 seconds it replenishes, so generally you're okay. But as soon as there's a 3rd person trying to get supply, there's a limit, and not everyone can have it all, and suddenly you're going to be fighting over it. And the fact that you're now fighting over it puts a lot more emphasis on that mid-fight. I've always understood that the mid-fight was supposed to be a big element of Stronghold. One of the biggest criticisms people come out with the game type is, oh, I want PvP, I don't want to be spending all my time fighting gates, and I don't want to spend all my time fighting PvE stuff, I want to fight other people. And, you know, the mid-fight should be a big moment then for people to say, well, yeah, but most of the game is about who's winning those mid-fights. Those are really important, but they weren't before. So now with the supply change, there's still enough supply to keep people rolling, to keep the NPCs moving, hopefully, but people will be fighting a lot more, and there's more importance over actually who controls that central area. That's a big change and quite important. Another big thing for Stronghold, people still didn't care about the Treb. Treb's now stronger. It will kill all door breakers and archers on the lane in just 2 shots. So if you're playing that defensive role, you can get your hands dirty yourself by killing enemies, blinding them, keeping your NPCs healed up and defended. Or you can get on the Treb, like that's a part of the defense role now, and it's actually really good. One, you can contribute to the mid-fight by trebbing the middle area, as you always could, but now you can also very confidently treb mist summon locations when those come out, and you can really easily clear waves of enemies, and Hugh talks a little bit about the terrain and how it's actually kind of difficult to get up to the Treb. Trebs still repair automatically after 2 minutes. I don't see the point in that. If they want a lot of emphasis over supply, if they want people to be constantly wanting that, constantly be down there and interacting, fighting with one another, then surely Treb should only be repaired through supply. I don't get why it's just being auto-rebuilt. It also makes it feel really unrewarding to kill an enemy Treb, but maybe Treb is now important enough that it will feel rewarding because you have to get them off, otherwise they're just going to destroy all your offense. Second to last change, yeah, there's been a lot. They added a new buff called Behind Enemy Lines. Now, what this means is if I am constantly face rushing the Lord, my entire team is like going 5 to the enemy Lord, 5 to the enemy Lord. Your back's against the wall as a defender, and what you'd find in Stronghold is you'd keep killing enemy players that were coming in, but because they kept trickling because of the spawn times, your kind of back was always against the wall, and you could never get out, and you could never stage that counter push. You just keep getting pushed further and further and further and further and further back until the game maybe times out if you in the best case scenario, but they still win anyway because they're deeper in your base than you're in theirs, or you would just straight up lose. So there's now a buff, okay, called Behind Enemy Lines, and that means I, as an attacking player, if I keep face rushing, while I am inside the enemy's territory, like through their gates, if I die, I drop 2 supply. And so now for the defenders, if they manage to kill someone and they're res rushing, I can pick up 2 supply and in theory then quickly spawn 2 archers or door breakers or whatever myself and get that counter push going. And my back isn't always against the wall. If I wipe an enemy team that's pushing into my Lord, I can suddenly push back that much harder because I don't have to worry about supply in the midsection or anything like that. I can just quickly go spawn a bunch of stuff. I still question how much that's going to change the game type, considering where you spawn enemies from is quite far away from where the Lord is. And would it really have been so hard to just pass through the courtyard en route and grab supply as you were going? Is it going to make that much of a difference? But maybe I'm not considering some like terrain routes that exist and I'm just not aware of. But it's a nice idea anyway. And lastly, for Stronghold, the biggest change and the best one in my opinion, they've added an overtime mechanic. So another big problem with Stronghold before was, let's say you're in like some epic 2-way push. You've got both Lords are in combat. One of the teams is desperately trying to get that kill. It's been a long, grueling game. There's 30 seconds left on the clock, and the fights are grinding down, grinding down, grinding down. You desperately want to see who's going to win, and then the game times out. And that's it. It's over. There's no, like, decent end to it whatsoever. Both Lords were still alive, and it was really close to resolving on its own. That is frustrating as hell. So, they've added overtime, and all this means is if the game is about to time out, but one or both of the Lords are in combat, the game won't end. The game will only end when either one of the Lords dies, obviously, and thus a team wins, or both Lords are out of combat, and then the game will stalemate. So you're going to have these cool little plays where people are rushing in, trying to keep the Lords in combat, and it means that the only time the game's going to end is once an attacking group's been wiped in a Lord room, and it is actually over, and then you can kind of prove, yeah, we've finished the game. I think there is a hard cap after that for overtime as well on 6 minutes, but I doubt we'll ever reach that. It's kind of a clever way that they've done it, because it means truly stalemated games where the teams are so evenly matched that neither of them have even got through like the second gate. Those games are still going to end in 15 minutes anyway. I've already been feeling a little bit, now that I've got my preferences, now that I can say, do I want to play Stronghold or do I want to play Conquest, I'm already feeling myself thinking, I'll play Conquest, because I don't know how long the Stronghold games are going to be, and I just want to quickly get my daily. And so it is important that Stronghold games are around the same length as Conquest games, so that people don't do that, and then Stronghold just like loses a huge amount of population. I do think a large chunk of PvPers right now are only doing it for their dailies, and for like the various reward tracks that are there, like the Glorious reward track, or the Dry Top reward track, because it's an easy way to get Amberite fossils. So yeah, I do agree that it needs to be a short length of time, and these are pretty niche situations anyway, but in those niche situations where it's really clutch and you have no idea who's going to win, you have overtime, and every single one of them sound like positive steps for Stronghold. Some of them, like the Behind Enemy Lines and specifically Archers, I think still aren't the entire solution, but we'll see what the feedback's like after this one. POI, just to finish the video off, did have some other little sections. I had a section with some prominent PvPers, actually came on the live stream, talked a bit about PvP. Honestly, I'm not really sure how good that segment was for getting more people into PvP, but it was nice to see the faces behind some of the names we already know. A Restless, who you may have seen in a lot of my comment sections, had a character named after him on one of the Visualwood live streams, is creating a really awesome app. Actually appeared on the stream as well and talked a little bit about his previous app, which won the Overwolf app contest, where you get like markers in-game for people on TeamSpeak. And lastly, probably the coolest bit for me, aside from maybe the quotes from Colin, were the sound design guys. There was a video on the Guild Wars 2 YouTube channel a long time ago, long before launch, with these guys talking about just what they do to make various sound effects. The earliest piece of information after the initial like 2007 or whatever it was reveals of Guild Wars 2, okay, after those came out and they did like the movement of the world article and stuff, information about Guild Wars 2 died down completely, and there was nothing for a long time. And the first bit of information we got about Guild Wars 2, before tons of other stuff, before the profession reveals began, before the convention demos, before all of it, the first thing we got was a small article about sound design in Guild Wars 2, and about how footsteps would have different sounds when you're walking on different materials in the game world. So it was really cool to see the stream, and these sound effects guys came on and they talked about how they did some of the SFX for the various creatures in the jungle. Reminded me a lot of some old like concept art reels, which I'll end this video on, that were just the most immersive, wonderful things ever and made me really excited about the game. And yeah, these guys talked about how they made some noises, and we got that little teaser I showed at the start of the video too. So that was fun. I think that's something a lot of people won't appreciate, but was really cool, and I'm glad that Ruby brought them on, and I hope to see him again as well. Honestly, if there's like a slow news week, bring those guys on, because that was really awesome. Anyway, so there you go, guys. That's news for you today. I have no idea how this ended up such a long video, but I hope you enjoyed. Thanks very much for supporting, guys, and I guess I will see you tomorrow. I got a cool idea for a Ranger trap build video, which is rather hilarious, so we might see that at some point. Cheers, guys. Catch you next time.